what I want to sort of bring out again is about what is important to Avraham, and what can we learn, or what can we see in the narrative of what is recorded here in this Parsha in the Torah, that has underneath it a very complex exchange of ideas. One of the things that the commentators really sort of stop and ponder and have a big discussion about here is what is happening in verse 3. So the Parsha begins in the English, and the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. So again, the word here that is translated as Lord is the four-letter name of God, Hashem. So remember, we're always asking the question, what name in the Hebrew is sitting behind? Because it helps us understand the relational context of the way God is being presented in the text. So we have Hashem here. We have this attribute of mercy and kindness. This way of understanding the nature and character of God as interacting with us as a parent does a child, considering who he is speaking to as a part of his family. It's just a beautiful way of looking at it. There's many ways of looking at this name, but let's just focus on that. So there is a level of intimacy here that communicates relational familiarity. Let's put it that way. Okay. So in the green there we have Vayira. So this is for what the Parsha is named. So Vayira means, or is translated as appeared. So, and the Lord appeared. So, and Hashem appeared. Now, what's important to understand about this verb here is that it comes from the root yara, which means to perceive or to see. So, the appearance here implies to us the capacity for Avraham to be aware of God's presence, to see him. Now, it doesn't describe to us, and this is very important, what God looks like. And this is where the commentators take a very strange and interesting sort of diversion. Because we have in verse 1 Hashem, we have the four-lettered name of God. And then it goes into verse 2, and he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, there were three men. So three men were standing in front of him. Okay, so the Lord Hashem appears to him, and then it all of a sudden then it changes to say, and then he became aware, or he lifted his eyes and he looked. So the vayisav einecha, and he lifted einecha, a nav, his eyes, vayad, and saw. So this is exactly, well, it's not exactly, but the letters are the same. So vayar in verse 2 are the same letters as vayira. Okay, so the phonetics are different. So the way the verb is being conjugated here has changed. So, and he saw. Well, and he appeared, and he saw, v'hine, behold, and behold, shelosha anashim, three men. So we have this word here, anashim, which talks about men, okay? So he perceives them as men. But what's really interesting, and so again, Avraham quickly stands up and runs to them. And this is where the commentary gets really interesting, and what I want to get to. Because in verse 3, he doesn't use the word Hashem, or he doesn't use the word Elohim. He uses this word Adonai, which I've highlighted there in the red. So, and he says to them. Okay, so now we are aware he's not speaking to God, he's speaking to these three men that he's become aware of. And why is he so Why is it so important to him that he has to get up from where he is and run towards them and start to talk to them? And he says, Adonai im na matzati chen be'einecha al na ta'avor me'al avdecha. Okay, so he says, Adonai, O Lord, they translate it as Lord. So, Lord. Now, here's what's really interesting, because there are two ways of looking at the use of this word here. Because one, it appears to be in the singular. So, O Lord, if I have found, imna, if, please, na. So na is like a asking of something. So if please, matzati, I have found favor. So I have found chen. Chen is the word for grace. So if I have grace, if I have favor in be'einecha, in your eyes, please, al na, please, ta'avor, me'al, do not pass, so ta'avor, don't pass me by, please don't pass, me'al, from me, your servant. So this is where he then goes into the asking them, stay and have something to eat. So from this we realize that the issue of hospitality is very important to Avraham. But who is he offering hospitality to? And how do they reply to this? So let's look at what is going on here. Because the chapter at first glance seems simple, okay? But it is complex and it is ambiguous. So there's things going on here that cause us to stop and ask the question, what's happening? Why are these words being used the way they're being used? What is going on? Who is Avraham talking to? Who is he not talking to? Who is replying to him? And how is he responding to that? And why and what is going on in the whole scene? So verse 1, God appears to Avraham. Verse 2 to 16, Avraham meets these men who we realize later on are actually angels, and there's 3 of them. And then it moves on from 17 to 33 to the dialogue between God and Avraham about the fate of Sodom. Okay, so Rashi does something very interesting here, and he says that God appears to Avraham on the 3rd day of his circumcision, and this is why he's sitting down, and that God Hashem has come to see how Avraham is doing. Now this is a very different idea than most people realize, because what is the context? What precedes this verse? And it is the covenant of circumcision. And it says that Avraham circumcised himself, he circumcised his son Ishmael, who was 13 at the time, and all his household. So not just him, the whole household of men who are with Avraham are now circumcised. And we know that when an adult or even a child who is beyond the age of 8 days, the circumcision is a painful experience, okay? It's something that's really, it takes a lot out of you. And there's not a lot you can do for a little while. And so they say that things are getting pretty bad by the 3rd day. You're in a lot of pain. And it's interesting when we look at the narrative about what happened with Yaakov's daughter, Dinah, and her abduction and rape, and the response of Simeon and Levi when they waited for 3 days for the men of Shechem to be at their lowest point of strength, so they're in their most pain. They then go and attack them, and these men can't do anything about them. They're in so much pain that literally they just are like lambs to the slaughter, as they say proverbially. So Avraham is in a lot of pain. And so the other interesting thing about, so Hashem, Rashi says Hashem is there to visit with Avraham to see how he's doing, and that the three angels are there because they are on assignment from God, and that one of these angels is there to heal Avraham of the pain of his circumcision, and that healing happens the moment that Avraham sees them and stands up, even though he's in pain, and runs towards them. And so that angel then heals Avraham of his pain so that Avraham can fulfill his heart's desire to continue to be hospitable, which is hard to do when you're in a lot of pain. So what are the other two angels there about? So one of them there is there to deliver the prophecy, or to deliver the beginning of the miracle of Sarah giving birth to a son, and that the other angel, the third angel, is actually on his way to deliver the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And here's what's interesting, is that they're saying that the angel who healed Avraham, he has another assignment or another mission as well, which is to go with the angel who would bring the destruction, to go with him to rescue Lot. So it's very interesting. Now, here's where things get really interesting in the commentary, and that is with the usage of this word Adonai. So why does Avraham use the term Adonai? So there's a couple of ways we can approach this word being here in the text, and one is that we can translate the term Adonai as God, which therefore refers to it as a holy name. In contrast, and now this is where things are really interesting, because we can also translate that as Lord, okay, not as God but as Lord's, but it can also be in reference to being in the plural. And so that Avraham is actually saying, Lords, or Adonai, Lords, you three men, if I have found favor in your sight, don't pass by, accept my hospitality. And this is really interesting because it suggests that Avraham interrupts the visit of Hashem with him, okay, and says, hold on a minute, I've just become aware of three strangers. I don't know who they are, but the importance of hospitality to me is very, very high, because when I invite people into my house to share bread with them and to give them comfort, and then I am able to talk to them about my belief of the one God and the one Creator. And this is something that we know was very important to Avraham, as he desired to share the knowledge of God with those that he met. So the commentators approached this verse in a very interesting way, these verses in an interesting way, where they say that the Lord appeared to Avraham. Avraham looks up, sees three men standing over him, and on seeing them he hurried from his tent door to meet them and bowed down. So he was turning away from God. And this is where things get interesting, because he can say, my God, if I have found, so if we treat Adonai as being referring to Hashem, okay, so we have the name Hashem in the first verse. We now go into verse 3, and he says, and he turns to God and says, if I have found favor in your eye, don't pass away. Please wait while I go and talk to these three men and offer them something to eat and offer them hospitality. So he's saying, my God, if I have found favor in your eyes, don't leave your servant. In other words, please wait until I have given hospitality to these men. So he then turns to the men and says, let me send for some water so that you may bathe your feet and rest under this tree. So this is what they call this a rather daring interpretation, which became the basis for the principle in Judaism that greater is hospitality than receiving the divine presence. So faced with a choice between listening to God and offering hospitality to what seemed to be human beings, Avraham chose the latter. So God acceded to his request and waited while Avraham brought the visitors food and drink before engaging him in dialogue about the fate of Sodom. So, how can this be? How can this be so? It seems disrespectful at best, heretical at worst, to put the needs of human beings before attending to the presence of God. What the passage is telling us, though, is something of immense importance. So Avraham was aware in this time that the idolaters, or the idolatrous nature of everybody around him, was that they worshipped the sun and the stars and the forces of nature as gods. They worshipped power and the powerful. Okay, so this comes back to how society functioned. They worshipped power and the powerful. This is why men were under the illusion that they were gods, and why people referred to them as gods. There's no greater example of this than the pharaohs. See, Abraham knew, however, that God is not in nature but beyond nature. There is only one thing in the universe on which he has set his image, the human person. Okay, every person, powerful and powerless alike. So the forces of nature are impersonal, which is why those who worship them eventually lose their humanity. So one cannot worship impersonal forces and remain a person, compassionate, humane, generous, forgiving, precisely because we believe that God is personal, someone to whom we can say you. We honor human dignity as sacrosanct. Okay, so the usage of the term here, Hashem, talks about God being personal, and Avraham understands that people are important because they carry the image of God. They are created in his image, and that is why treating people with dignity, offering them hospitality, was so important to Avraham. So Avraham, who is the father of monotheism, knew the paradoxical truth that to live the life of faith is to see the trace of God in the face of the stranger. So it's easy to receive the divine presence when God appears as God. What is difficult is to sense the divine presence when it comes disguised as three anonymous passers-by. Now this to me has really given me pause to stop and think about the way we often treat each other because we believe that the presence of God is more important, or the mission of God as we perceive it is more important. What Avraham is saying here is that God is not offended when we pause, we place a pause and say, I can see a moment here where I can show compassion and kindness to some strangers. Give me a moment, please, so I can fulfill the desire to elevate these people and to help them feel important. Now we understand that these three men were in fact angels, but Avraham didn't know that. There is no indication in his dialogue with them that he understood that they were angels. Okay, it wasn't until later on that started to become evident. And so Avraham wanted to make these men feel important. And it wasn't that he was abandoning or walking away from the presence of God. He was just saying, here's an opportunity to elevate strangers so that they can become aware of the precious nature of God that is in them, that I am aware of, so that I can introduce them to the God that I know, who places such value on human life. So that was Avraham's greatness. He knew that serving God and offering hospitality to strangers were not two things, but one. So this is why this sort of radical interpretation of this verse is really, really important to us, because it begins that discussion of how do we treat others, how do we treat strangers, even, when because we get offended and upset when people, disturb our time with God, or we become aware of people and it disturbs, what we're doing with God. Avraham is saying here that our walk with God and the way we see people are intertwined. So again, what is it? God appears to Avraham to inquire and to have a discussion with him, which ultimately was about the result of his action or his intent towards Sodom and Gomorrah. And in the process of that, this highly elevated encounter with God, Avraham becomes aware of three strangers and pauses his interaction with God to offer them hospitality, to make them feel important, to say to them, you are just as important to me as my time with God. And I want to provide that atmosphere of my engagement with God. I want you to experience in that by coming into my environment, into my place of engagement, where I can offer you food, I can offer you comfort. Isn't that what hospitality is about? Again, strangers. Who are these people? He doesn't know. But look at the way his response is to them. And there's something also, I just think that's a wonderful way of looking at this and integrating into the way we think about our interaction with God, the way these three verses can be looked at, okay? Can be looked at and can be read. In other words, God, I know if I found favor in your eyes, wait here while I go and do this. And realizing that God is not going to be offended by that fact. So it's interesting as well, Rashi points out that ultimately we become aware of these people, these three men, and that they are angels, and that we can actually know who these angels are. And so Rashi states that Michael or Michael was the one to bring the tidings to Sarah that she would give birth to a son in a year's time. And the second one is Gavriel. So he is the one who would overturn or bring destruction to Sodom. And the third angel is Raphael, which is the one to heal Avraham and then go on to save Lot. And it's interesting, you look at their names and they're very, very powerful names of the essence of their interaction and why they were created. And I love the name Raphael in the Hebrew. Raphael, as they say in English. So Rapha is to heal, and he healed. Rapha. So when there's this wonderful blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Rofi Chol Basar Umafli La'asot. So blessed is the Lord our God who heals. Rofi, he heals. Kol Basar, all flesh. And Umafli La'asot, and performs wonders. So this is how I know this Rafa or Rofi, he heals, is the healer. Wonderful, wonderful stuff.